We acknowledge the Darug people of the Eora Nation as the traditional owners of the land we work on. We pay our respects to elders, past, present, and emerging.
Always was, always will be.
Hi everyone, welcome to our podcast Mindkshetra Talks Lost in Translation. We are a mother and daughter duo, Indian Australians living in Sydney. We are using our personal experiences and insights to connect and relate with people with similar experiences.
We are using this podcast as our voice to unpack topics that are often lost in translation within our South Asian community. We are doing this podcast with the intention to break down the barriers in communication that may exist between parents and children, and we hope to offer some talking points to instigate these conversations. Hi everyone! This is the 7th episode of Mindkshetra Talks Lost in Translation. We're up to number 7. I can't believe it. That's actually a lot of episodes.
I think there is a lot of that is just 7 hours of conversation, 40 minutes each. But every time we do the intro, and I'm super glad that we are going to talk about this in this episode because it's about language and accents and how language helps us perceive our inner sense. So I am so excited, and I'm also excited that over the weekend we got recognized for our work and called out for the first time as podcasters, which is
That's
super
that's a pretty big
exciting.
achievement. Yeah, that's a pretty big achievement.
For two people who don't know anything about podcast industry, to be recognized as podcasters without having to actually say anything, that's I think that's a big task for
Agreed.
our first season of episodes.
Agreed. Agreed. I think we've come a long way, and we hope that everybody has enjoyed listening to the episodes as much as we have enjoyed making them. Yeah, so I guess like you said, Mummy, this episode is about speaking a native language, learning your mother tongue, um
And
all
and
that
rightly
stuff.
so, when you asked about this episode, and you said, this is not an episode I want to do. What is this about language and well-being, and what is there to unpack about it? And I actually think this is one of the most it's not focused at all, and it's not talked about at all. Actually, there is not a lot of attention or nuance paid to how language affects our well-being, and especially as migrants, how for me it was very important, a language, and even the fact that you're calling me mummy when all I hear in my mind when you call me mummy is amma.
Yeah, I don't know if that's like more concerning that I'm like a 21 grown ass woman like still calling you mommy, but it doesn't matter to me because you are my
What would
mommy.
you rather call me? You better not call me by my first name.
Rupa Patazarati.
See, again, language and how we address people also plays an important role in how respect comes along. And that was something I could never get my head around here in Western culture. People calling people older than you by their first name. And you can definitely not call me Rupa Parthasarthi ever unless you're introducing me and giving me credit on your Oscar movies. So never ever, let's set that clear. Not calling me Rupa Parthasarthi. I'm not having it. I let you call you by your Western name, by my Western name, mummy or mum or ma sometimes. Because all I hear and trained myself here to my hear is it all whatever version you call me, all I hear when I listen to it is amma.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I mean, like, there's a lot to unpack in this episode just because, like, I feel like, because growing up in a Western society when you obviously are not white, and a lot of the role models and people you saw outside were not white and they only spoke in one language. It's like a lot to process, I think, and it's something we don't necessarily talk about a lot, like navigating knowing a different language but then not knowing the official language that is spoken in that country. So, I guess my question to you to start this episode is you grew up speaking Tamil.
It's not Tamu, it's Tamil.
Okay, I'll say that again. You grew up speaking Tamil. I
Tamil.
did it. I did it. I did it. I did it.
The sound
I
is
did
different, but
it.
I'll let you go because I think uh, at least you are attempting to say
It's
it
the
properly.
thought that counts.
Not necessarily, but it's okay. Carry on.
Yes, and then shading. Mabay. Stop. And but you studied in an English school.
English
So like
medium school,
how was
yeah.
it like navigating that? Because did they teach you in English but then you were like speaking Tamil at home?
See, one thing you have to know about India is a very big land, and the culture varies from a few hundred kilometers and state to state. And even when we are in India, we could be uh, people speaking our family could be speaking a language at home, but the state you live in could be a different language
Yeah.
which is operating under. For me, I grew up in the southern part of India called Chennai. It's a metropolitan city, but came from the outskirts. Um, my mother tongue is Tamil, and I lived in a state which was Tamil, which spoke Tamil.
Yes.
So Tamil, the boards, everything you would find was in Tamil with a translation or a very crude translation in English. So every board wherever I went, every shop, every sign, every street sign, every person I interacted with, including my teachers, other than my school hours, I spoke in Tamil. So Tamil was my the language I spoke day in day out. So my thoughts, my feelings, my expressions, and how I think. The default setting, if you call the default language setting in your Netflix, is Tamil for me.
Mm.
Uh, and I get deeply emotive and evocative when it comes to hearing Tamil. Having said that, my second language, the first second language I had to learn, so English medium school, so we called English then as the first language of how you studied. So English was it, but we never spoke in English to each other. In the class we were supposed to, because I had a convent education, so we had to speak English. Um, my third language, I had a choice to select any other language you can do. You can choose Tamil as your third language to read and write. You can choose French or you can choose Hindi. Now, Hindi is the national language in every state, but in the south of India, the majority of the sentiment is we never spoke Hindi. We always
Yeah.
only spoke. Now, again, south of India has different states. So, just for example, you could be a Tamil speaking person living in another state, which means, say, for example, even in South India, if you lived in Bangalore, you could be a Tamil speaking person whose mother tongue is Tamil, whose the state in which you live in speaks Kannada, and the national language is Hindi.
Yeah. Because
And
I
you
think a
might
lot of people get confused when you say, like, I'm from India. They'll either ask you, do you speak Indian? So you'll be like, no. Like, do you speak Australian? Or they'll get confused and they'll say, oh, do you speak Hindi? Which they just assume is the encompassing language of the entire country. But, like, you have to, like, specify, like, where are you from in India?
And to complicate it further, Tamil has further dialects as well. So the person who's
Yeah.
coming from city could have a different accent and different set of words to the person who speaks Lankan Tamil, Sri Lankan Tamil,
Yeah.
which is from Sri Lanka,
Yeah.
which is different from a person who is grown up in the village in the districts of Tirunelveli, like the south of there is a different dialect who comes from Madurai, different states. Um, Similar to how the different languages are there.
Yeah.
So in my case, I grew up speaking three languages. Okay, so Tamil, which was the language at home and which is the way I think. Hindi, because that is what I learned to read and write, and the logic being because Tamil was such an exposure, we were forced to learn Tamil anyways. Like all the boards, I couldn't communicate or I wouldn't know if I didn't know. It was just by watching and observing, I knew those words and I didn't officially learn the language. So I know how to read and write Tamil by observation and by experiential learning because the boards, the communications, everything was in Tamil. Hindi is the national language. And because we grew up highly influenced by colonialism, English is very much spoken, unlike a lot of stereotypes which happens if we come on elephants and we ride on elephants if we go to school. I know even one person asked you, did your mom go on elephant to the school
Mm.
even when you came here, which was like 20 years back. So English is very well spoken. There are a lot of people who speak English. In fact, a lot of scholars who come from it. Now, if I have to compare the languages Appa had to learn, so he spoke Tamil, but he lived in a region called Mumbai, in which the state's language was Marathi. So he understands Marathi and he talks Marathi. The national language is Hindi, so
Mhm.
he speaks Hindi. So he and then he studied in an English medium college or school. So he understands Tamil, then he understands Marathi, then he understands Hindi, and he understands English
Mm.
and speaks all the languages.
Mm.
So and so forth of different people and different combinations of people from different regions. So India in itself, when you think of the language, yes, everybody can mostly communicate in English, but they all have like multiple layers of identity of what they relate to and the
Mm.
family they relate to. It's not like how it is here, like you all speak English and that's it.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's my background. How
Mm.
did you find growing up in Australia where you had mum who used to insist, who's me, Amma who used to insist that you speak Tamil and learn Tamil, Appa, who used to is very comfortable in Hindi more than Tamil because he spoke Hindi with his friends,
Mm.
and then having to communicate everywhere in English. How was that for you? And was it confusing?
I mean, there's like a lot of layers to that question. In a sense, it was confusing because I wasn't necessarily sure like how I should communicate because there's like this thing of the way you speak at home is necessarily not the way that you present and speak like outside. Like even now, I have an accent, but then at home, I don't have an accent. But this is the thing, my friends who like are in the outside world who are like not my like main blood family, they won't think I have an accent, but then if I speak to you on the phone, my accent will like automatically change and they'll be like, "Wait, what? You have an Indian accent?" But then you will say that when I am at home and I speak to you and Appa and stuff, like I don't have an accent. But when I go like I speak now, you'll say that it's an accent.
Oh my God,
So
you
like
have
it's
a very heavy accent, and it's very visible when we do these podcasts because the way I speak, when I speak alone, you can see that it feels like I don't have an accent, but when compared to you and the way you speak, it's
that's
like
not how I
almost
speak,
like
mommy.
that's like how you speak, Riti. That's how
It's
and the
not
way
how
you
I
say your name is because your name sounds to me like it's not Riti, it's Riti. And I go, who's this
No.
girl? I didn't name this girl. Her name is Riti. And I know we've spoken about this in language, and I hate the way people make excuses not to learn your name. And I kind of find it very disrespectful if you don't know how to pronounce my name, because that is a basic courtesy you have to extend to people, is what I think. And
Mm.
so you were saying something, and we need to
Yeah.
talk about the name bit as well.
I mean, see, the thing is, like I mentioned in the first episode of the podcast, I went to a like predominantly Indian primary school. It was in an area that's very, there was a lot of people from India who had come. So the students,
South
they were
Asian
South
subcontinent.
Asian students. So they were, I was able to relate to them in the sense that they also spoke a different language at home. So I
And not
wasn't
necessarily
necessarily,
Tamil.
they're not necessarily Tamil, that was the thing. They were predominantly North Indians who spoke Hindi, Punjabi, and they're very North Indian languages, and like especially Hindi, that's the language of Bollywood, that's the language of Hindi cinema, shall I say. So it was conflicting in the sense that I wasn't able to speak with them in Hindi because I was learning Tamil. And at the time, Tamil was considered not a very, I hate to say this, but I don't think there's any other way to say it, a cool language. Hindi was like the language of Bollywood. If you spoke Hindi, then you know like what's hip, you know what's happening. But Tamil, you're like, oh, you're from South India. Like, you don't really
Yeah,
matter.
that's colorism at its best.
It's
Yeah.
colorism. There's just a lot of issues, and like I could go on talking about it for like hours. But especially like growing up in a school that they mostly spoke Hindi with their family, it was just like little things that I was struggling to navigate. But in a sense, like when I went home, I was picking up on things, learning Tamil from you and Hindi from daddy and stuff like that. So I can't speak Hindi that well. I can like get by, but I can understand it, like I will say like 80%. But Tamil is like the language that I was taught, that I learn, and that's like how I also connect with my family and my grandparents as
Katapati, yes.
well. Yeah. So it was just like little things that I picked up on um as a kid, and then even now you see the popularity for Hindi cinema and Bollywood, as they say, because Bollywood is mainly Hindi cinema. And you know, it's only now that South Indian cinema is actually getting a voice and it's becoming more popular in the media. And I think, you know, this is also the thing that, because it was a predominantly South Asian school, everyone just assumed that, oh, you're Indian, so you speak Hindi, so you must understand Hindi. And that was something I had to like understand, that like, oh, again, and that was my exposure to learning that there's different languages in India, and things like that. Yeah.
I think one of the things I faced here when I came here, and we speak about racism in India and white, having the stereotype of what a white skin versus dark skin is. For me, colorism was always there even in India, as in
Mm,
because even when I was traveling as a student and speaking, and I had in Chennai, it's a very though cosmopolitan. It was called Madras at that moment. Predominantly, we I only had Tamil speaking friends with the very few North Indians who had settled, which means Hindi speaking people who spoke Hindi as their mother language, mother tongue, was very sparse.
mm,
Because of the type of skin I had, there was a
yeah.
natural assumption that I could speak. I'm from a North Indian background. Again, that's a stereotype of how South Indians look. And also, there is this whole clubbing when you come to Australia. As soon as I say South Indian, everybody thinks that there is like this one faction of place like Queensland or Western Perth where everybody talks the same language without understanding that Tamil is different to Telugu, which is different to Tulu, which is different to Malayalam, which is different to, all those Kannada and all those language and Konkani and all those languages come from the south part of India. Um, and a Tamilian does not understand Telugu, and a person who speaks Telugu doesn't understand Malayalam. It can happen on these combinations and so on and so forth. One interesting thing I found here when I came here and I used to wait outside after you left is, as you speak about these predominantly North Indian, one of the comments, I get it even now, which I'm still kind of baffling how to do this, is somebody when they some and it peeves me a lot, and I know there is a lot of rage when I say this, is that when either they say my name, they assume that I'm a North Indian person who's married to a South Indian because Parthasarathi is a very South Indian name. So they blatantly say, oh, where are you from? Or, they automatically assume I'm from Assam or Bengal, or I've had multiple things, but somewhere from the northern part of India. And another thing is because I speak very well Hindi very well, and mostly I try and converse in Hindi. And the minute I say to them I'm actually a Tamilian, my name is my Parthasarthi is my father's name, and I'm actually a Tamilian. They go, oh, but you don't look like a South Indian. They
See,
say
like, what is a South Indian supposed to look like? Are we like,
dark skinned. I'll tell you what their perception of a South Indian is. Dark skinned, somebody with an accent who can't talk Hindi.
mm,
And so when it comes to discrimination and othering and sitting in this space called intersectionality, uh, it is very complex for people who come from cultures, not only Indian cultures, like Chinese cultures, Vietnamese cultures, Filipino cultures, where the language and everything varies. Vietnamese cultures, where every Korean cultures, because the dialects and the thing are not the same, but people just assume, just because you look at somebody, everybody is an Asian, everybody is an Indian. um, and so this layer of intersectionality in othering is something I carry with myself a lot. Okay. Another thing which for me I found very fascinating is, how did you, we did not change your name, you have a very short name, Ritti,
Mm.
and you had to learn, the first thing I taught you when you were I know it feels very cruel, when you were 2 years old, and as soon as you could teach alphabet, was to spell your name and tell your name correctly.
Mm.
And you used to
That's
say
important, I guess. Like, I mean, how do we like say this? You always go into a place. If you go into, if I'm like I'm in a South Asian and I go into a Western place and there's different South Asians there. Like, there's this joke that like, oh, what's your name? Oh, what's your white name? Like, my name is Ritti, but my white name is Ritty. So like, I just like, it's just funny to me that we have to conform to a white name for the Western society, for people in Western society to make it easier to pronounce our name.
mm-hmm,
And it's just
mm-hmm.
become this like recurring pattern that we just accept it. And then it gets to the point where it's then too late to like correct people. Like, actually, my name is, you know.
My name is
So
Ritti, and my
yeah.
name is spoken this way. So, one of the things which peeves me is every time when I say, like, I used to apologize to people like on the phone for having a very long name for a very long time. For example, if the phone person used to call, the bank person used to call, they have to ID you, or somebody calls and you are at this expense of saying, okay, what is your name, tell me your full name. I used to say, okay, P for Peter, A for Apple, R for Roger,
Yeah, you
A
have to
for
say,
John,
and I
H for
remember like
Harry, A for Apple.
even, do you know like those exams where you have to color in the bubble and then write the letter and then you have to go like column by column? I used to make a joke that like my last name is so long that people have already started the exam and I'm still writing my name. I was like, these, I need to color in the bubbles. I need to write the name. And there
when
wasn't
you
enough
were
boxes.
when you were 2 years old, and I remember this thing when you were 2 years old, and I was teaching you the name, and I was telling you, there are 26 alphabets and you have 11 alphabets in your name, and you went, why do I have so many alphabets in my name? And you have a very special last name. Actually, it's one of the greatest scholars in Indian, and actually a saint. um, Another thing when it comes to language and name is also, in Indian cultures, it's a very, very prominent expression of an identity, the caste and the family and everything you which comes with it,
Mhm.
you know, complex and stuff like that. So
But like,
when
how
you
do you think that played a role on like your well-being? Like this navigating this colorism and then compromising your last name and then um growing
in
up in a school.
In India, I didn't have to compromise my last name because most of them had big names, anyways. And but Rupa was a very North Indian name, not for a South Indian, and I look like a North Indian, so I faced a little bit of challenge like that. Though I spoke Tamil at home, I also spoke Hindi, so I was like, there was a lot of microaggressions, and whenever I spoke English, I was considered somebody as who wants to show off, rather than fit in. So I always was very mindful that in order to fit in, I had to know proper Tamil. Like, I used to joke in Tamil, I used to talk in Tamil, read Tamil movies, Tamil songs. So my identity around who I am was very much centered around fitting in with the peers and the language they spoke, and not wanting to be picked up on because my appearance always was a problem. Um, because my white skin always seemed to be a, they used to assume the home I came with, because they assumed white skin people always are very rich and very arrogant and very, there was a lot of stereotypes which came with how I looked and all those things. Coming here, having to tell my name again and again, um, and people not wanting to say my name properly and me apologizing, for the first couple of years I felt like I had to apologize and wanted to fit in. I then understood that it was actually microaggression, and then I turned it around, especially when it came to you and Rhea being taught that language. I became very adamant that you had to learn a language. I felt if I didn't teach you Tamil, that would be lost with the next generation. But I was told and given advice not to communicate, not to confuse you, and that your vocabulary of language would become less if I confuse you, and to teach you only one language, which was
Mm.
English. Again, I think that was not a good advice, and I think that is also a form of microaggression to, you know, conform to what the society wants. How did you find it? Me insisting that you learn Tamil. How did you find it? How was it challenging? Was it challenging or was it beneficial? Especially when it came to communicating with me and Tata Pati.
I think, I mean, having learned it from such a young age, I don't remember it as such as challenging, because in the same way, you speak to a baby when it's like growing up, and like it like picks up on the language that you're teaching the child. So I think you speaking Tamil to me was like my way of learning the language. And then I was at an age where, because I grew up in Australia, it was almost like learning two languages at the same time, like Tamil and English. So like I would go into the outside world, into preschool, into primary school, and speak English. But then I would come home and you would ask me questions in Tamil and I would answer in Tamil. And like there's like home videos of me like completely speaking in Tamil and like not like speaking English like at all. So in the sense I was like young enough to understand, it was just like coming here and like the microaggressions of, oh, you speak Tamil, not Hindi. Oh, like, have you like considered learning Hindi? Like, maybe then we can talk like together. And that was just like the outside well, and like growing up in a predominantly South Asian school and going to a school where a lot of my friends were of North Indian descent. That was just a challenge in itself. So then I had to like keep building on English. And then again, that kind of led me into a long time of wanting to learn Hindi more than Tamil, because I was like, okay, like this is the language of Bollywood, and like, you know, if I want to be a Bollywood actress, I need to learn like Hindi, and like, no one's gonna pay attention to someone who learns Tamil. As bad as that sounds, I know, but that was the like thought process in my head. That's again just my personal experience. But now, like looking back, I'm very glad I know Tamil, because it's a way for me to communicate on a different like nuance and subtlety that can't be achieved in English. And it just connects you to the culture, it just connects you to heritage, to family. There's like, in the same way you make like jokes in Hindi, and there's like certain subtleties and things you say in English to your friends and stuff. If you translate that into Hindi or Tamil, it won't have the same effect. But if you say it in Tamil, it's just like funnier, because when you translate it into English, it just doesn't mean the same thing, and doesn't hit. So I think in that sense, I'm very glad I know it now and I'm able to speak. And again, I like surprise a lot of my family because they don't expect me to know like Tamil like as much as I do. I remember like I was talking to my like grandma's, like one of my grandma's friends, and she was like, oh, is this your granddaughter? And I just like opened my mouth and I was like, Sauki ma eppadi irke? She was like, wow, you know Tamil. Like, wow, that's amazing. Like, and she didn't expect it at all. So then I think I definitely use it to my advantage. And then I was like, we were even talking about like while planning this episode how Tamil was used as like a code language, because like again, when my friends come over and stuff, and you need me to do something, you won't say it in English. You'll be like Riti, inga va, like come here, like I need to like speak to you, but you'll do it like you'll just give me a whole last like rant, but in Tamil, and I just be like, huh, yeah, yeah, and then just go about my day and like do what you asked. So like that's just like things that I'm like thinking about now.
I've
But
done both.
well-being,
I've done both. I think for me, Tamil, like I said, it because I think in Tamil, I think for me, mental health and words to communicate also becomes easier in Tamil. And for me, but what I find fascinating is though you talk Tamil, your sister doesn't talk as much, but she understands and she wants to talk and learn. And music was a way to for me to teach easily. Like you can talk and you can sing better in Hindi. You can sing better in Hindi and you can sing better in Tamil than actually speak it.
mm.
Um,
And now like thinking about it, like when you were just saying like my sister doesn't know it, like now thinking
sister
about it,
knows it,
if
but
you,
she doesn't speak it.
but in the sense that I just don't feel qualified enough. If I ever have kids, I just don't think I could teach them Tamil in the way that you did. Do you know what I mean? I don't feel qualified enough to like pass it on to the next generation because I'll only be able to teach them like one or two words, and then it will just kind of like die off. So that just kind of makes me like a little like sad.
It makes me more sad that you kind of feel like you don't have the confidence in teaching them. But I think it all comes down to exposure. When it comes to assimilation in new society, and I think that's why I'm passionate about doing this or talking about this language. On the surface, it looks like a very small deal. What is the big deal? You have to go to the land and adjust to the realities of the land, you know. And when you come here because you're migrants, this is how I feel as a parent. I had to give up a lot. I had to give up a family connection. And obviously, so I came for a big future and a better future and all that. But it's a lot of cost to play. And I think that's why a lot of people find it really hard to let go also. And finding the balance, right balance, there is a disadvantage to this as well. Sometimes in this need to pass on the culture, there is also a resistance to learn the way of the land, and kids are forced, or kids are, really forced authoritatively to learn the language, be this thing, be this culture, like you're not a good person if you have not learned Tamil, if you can't talk to your grandparents. I do, as a parent whose child is telling me that I don't think I'm qualified enough to pass it on to the next generation. I can see why parents want to do that because they want this to continue.
Mm,
But the harsh reality is, I feel like this also repulses the kids away from the parents because you're putting too much pressure on them to be a certain way and become the ambassadors of a land they have never experienced in their life as children.
mm. And the
Uh,
same connection is not there because you didn't grow up there. Like you don't feel the same way, and it's not right to blame someone that, oh well, your family's from here, but like my family might be from there, but I don't feel like I'm necessarily, it shows on my face, but I don't feel it inside, you know.
yes, so if I have to say this, and we joke about in our house, like I call you guys without offending anybody. It's a very personal joke, and I know if you are hearing this and I go, how can you say this, and you're getting offended, please note it's a personal joke between our family. Not necessarily we don't want you to agree, but I call you guys coconuts because you look very brown on the outside, but inside you have a lot of white ideologies, or you like, again going back with my personal experience. When your sister was 3, she used to say, I'm not Indian. I'm not Indian. India is not my heritage. I'm an Australian. You guys are Indians. You know, the first time I heard it, and I did not have a lot of mental health professional knowledge at that point. It is hurting and it is very scary to see your child identify with a culture which is not yours, to identify with an ideology which is not yours. What she meant to say to me was that she doesn't identify because she was not born there, she was born here. She considers herself absolutely an Australian, and I know that so do you. So, how has this language and being and looking a certain way and brown and all that affected how you perceive yourself? So, so when I say in my thoughts, always a Bollywood song plays if there is, and you keep telling me don't think like Karan Johar, who's like a Bollywood actor, director, or don't be very melodramatic like all those serials. Because in my mind, as soon as something happens, I think in Tamil, and then
Well,
there
I
is a
think in
translation
English.
which
So like,
happens, and then there are certain things when I express to you in communication, it's lost because what I think in Tamil cannot be communicated in English because sometimes there is no words.
well, I think in English, like I'll say, just because of the amount of exposure and I've like grown up there, and like honestly, I think I would consider English my first language and Tamil my second,
Third.
because like, yeah, because like when they
You're
say on the
second.
when I can, like when I write it on like forms, like, do you speak another language at home, you write the predominant language is English, but you speak a second language, which is unfortunate, I know, but it's just like, I'm not
It's
gonna
not.
lie and
I
say.
write the other way around. I say I
mm,
speak Tamil at home. That's my first language, and English is my second language.
mm. So it's just like things like that are just like, you notice, and it's like, it's just like, I wouldn't say like like is a complete roller like a 360 to your well-being. It's definitely like a roller coaster, but I wouldn't say it's a very like big one. It's just like things that you notice, and I think it definitely helps how you approach your like culture and how you move forward.
Can I ask you a question which I've been
mm.
meaning to ask after I watch all these episodes? There's this thing called Indian match. What is that thing? It
Indian
has been
matchmaking.
Indian matchmaking. In that, one of the contestants calls herself, and the serial is predominantly shot in US and UK, of people of South Asian origins who've been settled there, and they find a match. Okay, and in one of the episodes, the contestant calls herself ABCD, American born confused Desi, right? Do you think you are an Australian? Do you fit into that criteria? Are you an Australian born confused Desi? Or are you a Australian born ST, sorted Desi? Yeah. What do you feel like?
I just, I think I'm like both. I like, sometimes I'm an Australian born, but I'm not even Australian born. That's the thing. But also like Australian brought up, confused they see. Um, Sometimes yes, just like when you, there's like so much like things I could talk about, like when you go to certain places, when you go to certain suburbs, when you go to certain people's houses, just like different cultural things, just like that. But then at sometimes, other times I'm like, no, I'm pretty like sorted. Like I know that this is an important part of my culture and my heritage, and like this needs to be maintained, and like it's not going to be compromised. But other things I'm like, oh wait, do I want to change this a little bit so I can like fit into the Western mode, like the pronunciation of my name. But yeah, I just, there's just like too many things I like could talk about. But if you have any that like you kind of are in two minds about, that impact you from like one Western standpoint and um Desi standpoint, like we'd love to hear it in the comments. But like, what would be your well-being advice, mummy?
My well being advice is that language plays a very important role in how we see ourselves, how we communicate, and how we perceive our own identity and others.
Mm,
One language is not better than another, they
mm,
are just languages.
mm.
And English, though is spoken worldwide, is not the only language, should not be the only language of power. If I can't speak English, that's not a sign of my that's
Weakness.
weakness. It's not a weakness. It's no sign of my intelligence, right? Because English, and if I have an accent, I miss some words, especially as migrants. I miss some words. My grammar is not great because that's not my first language, and I'm actually using an extra hard central processing unit to translate while I'm talking. Okay, so doing any kind of othering and affecting somebody or making fun of somebody, it's not cool. It's not okay. And you shouldn't judge somebody by the way or the accent they speak. And unfortunately, uh, I have noticed that there is a discrimination in only for South Asians, like Asians. But when you have an South American accent, or when you have a Russian accent, or something like that, or a French accent, it's considered, oh my God, I would love that.
Mm,
And I wonder why.
mm,
And my well-being advice is language plays a very important role. So I always advocate for knowing your own connection and making an effort to learn your language, because it can help you build a connection not only with yourself but also a sense of identity and culture for generations to come.
mm.
What
I
is your
second that. I agree. I just think like my advice after this episode is just learn the language. Like pick up, even if it's like a little bit, only if you know a few words. Like it's you're 10 steps ahead than when you didn't know any of the words. So don't beat yourself up if you don't know the full language, but try and make an active effort to pursue and learn the language that is your mother tongue.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
Does that mean from now on you're going to introduce yourself as Ritti, not Riti? Riti
Mm.
Ramanujachari. That's not going to happen,
What?
is it? You're
What
still
are
going
you
to call yourself
speaking?
Riti.
Okay. Well,
So, for anybody, any moms, any kids, any young adults, anybody who's listening, if you connected to this episode and you want us to do topics, then let us know. Comments, follow, share, and we would always love to hear from you. And I would say vanakkam, nandri, dhanyavad, and shukriya. See?
I'll say bye. Have a good day, everybody. We
Bye,
hope you
Riti.
enjoyed this
Unless we meet
episode.
again, this is bye from me, Rupa Parthasarathy, and Riti Ramanujachari.
What she said. Bye, everybody.
Bye.